But actually, what I didn't really have any currency for was that how do I work with a very disparate group of people? Some are really great at their jobs, some on the path to that, some who don't really want to be in my team, and some who do. Domain specific expertise was flying around all over the place when I was first researching the power of teams. And obviously, it's more work and it's more effort to read something from another sector, distill it down, and then try to apply it to our context. And it would be just to read a bit of research or a handbook about schools. But I've genuinely learned tons from it, because we are in a bit of a bubble. That affects your feeling of belonging, because you think, oh, actually, like, is this really my tribe if people aren't really working? I thought this was really important to us, but maybe it's not to you. So I think the kind of competence and kind of follow-up angle is massive for belonging, and I think it's not as trendy or fashionable to kind of say that or write about that.
Welcome to Thinking Deeply About Primary Education, a podcast that makes time and space think about pedagogy, teaching and learning, professional development, anything of interest to time-poor but enthusiasm-rich primary teachers. This week on the show, I'm joined by Sam Crome, author of The Power of Teams and leadership expert. Now, recently, Sam made the move from secondary education to primary headship, and so I thought now would be the perfect time to see if what he's learned about leadership applies as much in primary as it does in secondary. Sam, it's great to have you here. How are you?
Thanks, Kieran. Yeah, very good. Thank you. Yeah, thanks for having me on.
No, my pleasure. I mean, probably my biggest regret in the 5 or so years we've been doing TDAPA is that Shannon Doherty said to me after a research ed, I've just been to a talk by Sam Crome. You have to have him on the podcast. And I waited, and then all of a sudden, there was no space in your diary. Well, I suppose I didn't. You were absolutely lighting the world on fire. So I'm really pleased I managed to bring you along eventually.
Oh, thanks, Kieran. Well, yeah, Shannon actually came to one of my first ever talks in Oxford, and she actually her and Neil had to sit on the floor. I couldn't believe that people had turned up to one of my first ever talks, and then the room was full, and she sat there in the aisle, and she's been a great supporter ever since. So I'm very grateful to her and Neil.
Yeah, no, and you can see why. I've been to a few of your talks, and I've enjoyed them and taken lots from them. So, I mean, in case anyone's not familiar with your work, I wonder if we start a little bit about who you are and how you got here today.
Yeah, sure. Well, most of my career has been spent in secondary schools, English teacher. I've done most roles in a secondary school, so like head of year, head of sixth form, head of English department, led the pastoral team, some curriculum team stuff, and was a deputy head for the last kind of 5 or 6 years in a secondary school. And then I got a trust role working across my trust part-time with the deputy head role. And thought that's where I was going to be this year, doing that role full-time across the trust. We're a big Catholic trust in Surrey. And then my CEO called me and asked if I'd help out a school for a year. And it's also a primary school. So I'm currently a head teacher in a primary school. And I feel like at the start of the year, I was pretending to know what I'm doing. And now I've graduated to like semi-pretending to know what I'm doing and semi-knowing what I'm doing. But it's been a lot of fun to change to a different phase. And actually, I really feel like we should sort of facilitate more people to be able to do that, because I've learned more in the last 6 months than I have done in probably 10 years.
Pretending has been like a bit of a leadership theme on the podcast recently, and in terms of almost fake it till you make it kind of situation. But like we always talk about in primary about how spending time as much in early years as you do in year 6 and everywhere between gives you a really good picture of where the pupils are coming from, where they're going to, etc. So yeah, so I can see how that might be true for primary and secondary. And I know some really great heads who have taken on a trust primary role and then moved into headship. So that's really interesting.
It's fascinating. Every day I go, oh, so they are capable of that. Or, we can ask them to do that and they'll do a cracking job with it. And I think I've just spent my career not underestimating the skill of primary teachers at all, because I never have, but not understanding what the levels you can really push and provide leadership opportunities for younger children, and they just thrive. And then I think, if I look back at my secondary career, I think a lot of really credible, well-practiced children in sort of leadership the leadership lens, probably come to my secondary schools and been like, oh, there's nothing for me to do for the first 4 years. So yeah, definitely a lot of food for thought about what I would do if I went back to secondary.
I think any transition is challenging. You know, I think the infant junior transition or the sort of infant junior middle transition. You know, I think you're definitely going to get like those expectations. You know, because a year two in an infant school is a big fish in a small pond, and then obviously a year two in a primary school is still a very small one. So I think the fascinated to discuss your experience in primary, but also your general thoughts on leadership as well. So, I mean, we're going to work under the assumption that you think teams are a good thing, or that and they can be really beneficial in a leadership context. Is there anything the schools miss when they focus too much on individual leadership and not enough on team efficacy or effectiveness?
Well, that's how I fell into the whole research behind teams, actually, to begin with. I was just getting fed up with going on leadership courses that asked me to reflect on my leadership style and, take that sort of infamous leadership style survey that you get shoved in front of you. And remember thinking it's great to be introspective about oneself and to know how you behave in situations as a leader. But actually, what I didn't really have any currency for was like, how do I work with a very disparate group of people? Some are really great at their jobs, some on the path to that, some who don't really want to be in my team, and some who do. How do I kind of mold them together into something that's better than just the individuals that I have? I didn't feel like there was any space for me to learn about that. And then you kind of, I think if you leadership is, I want to start by saying leadership is super important, and I really believe in a leader being the person that sets what I've kind of known to be called compelling direction. So someone has to set the tone and the vision and create this narrative about this incredible journey we're about to embark upon for this noble cause. Like you have to have some leader or leaders doing that. So I'm not underestimating the power of an inspirational leader to kind of march you up the hill as a group. But at the same time, I think that if you rely on that model too heavily, you kind of create this sort of the hero leader, the kind of martyr leader, the kind of cult of personality leader. And actually, as much as that person is important to sort of fly that flag, the real work, the work every single day, when you add up all the little percentages of work, happens in groups around the school. I've seen schools that have a very inspirational, charismatic leader, and then if you go down the next few layers into the school, complete dysfunction across the school when it comes to the way they meet and interact and learn stuff together. So yeah, I think there's a huge amount to be looked into for how we look after our groups and teams in school, so they are actually doing high quality work that moves things forward. And you don't need a really, really charismatic TED Talk style leader to do that great work. You just need to know how teams can perform well and how they can flourish and fail as well, because you need to understand that too. So yeah, I think schools could definitely put more work into that, and there's a huge amount of literature out there to support it as well. But the jury's out on whether it's happening more in schools yet, I suppose.
I always find, like in a primary context, whenever you've got maybe 3 or 4 form-entry schools, the cohesion in a team, or perhaps the increased chance of that dysfunction you describe, is more likely. And obviously in a secondary school, that's just normal. You've got your own little departments, which are equivalent to schools on their own. Is there anything you've learned about effective leadership that colleagues in larger primary settings might be able to take and think, actually, this could be the bedrock of avoiding almost like the cliques that naturally that rise up whenever you've got sort of large groups of people?
Yeah, well, I guess I've approached it from the opposite, because I've gone from big numbers of teams with large numbers of people in those teams, and now I'm the head of a one form entry primary where the staff team or the teaching staff team is 7 people. The SLT is me and one other person. So actually, I'm having to think carefully about how to take more formal structures that I've learned from secondary into the primary, so that we're not just sitting around having a cozy chat, because there aren't that many of us, which is really easy to do when you're a small school, I think. But for colleagues who are in a sort of a primary setting where maybe they have got multiple teams popping up, maybe there are 2 or 3 for entry form school, then yeah, I think having not thinking of your teams as cozy meetup chats is super important. And just because you get on really well and see each other all the time, you have to still map out a really purposeful schedule for the year of long term. Here's all the things we're going to do in our calendar throughout the year together in our meetings. You will obviously have to adapt that slightly when operational things get thrown up, but you can map out meetings throughout the whole year. And also do the same things that I would recommend any team do, which is like, right, share agendas before your meeting, give people opportunities to lead sections of the meeting about their expertise and have that on a rota that runs throughout the year as well, and kind of just formalize stuff so that things don't happen by accident. And I think in secondary schools, you just can't let that happen because there's like 120 classrooms and you'd have to run around like crazy if you didn't formalize meetings and teams really well. Whereas in a primary, one could potentially have a bit of a loosey-goosey approach to teams and meetings because actually like, well, if we don't cover that today, I'll just run around those 4 classrooms and just catch everyone up quickly. But actually, if you're having to do that, then it means you're not thinking deliberately enough. And it reminds me when I was first the head of English, I had that responsibility quite early in my career. It was again, I was just didn't really know what I was doing. So I'd think about the team meeting like the night before. I'm like, oh, right, I've got an hour with them tomorrow. How are we going to fill that? And not having a kind of a long-term approach or a very deliberate approach to the meeting. So I think that's where it starts, is kind of a long-term like mapping out of like, right, what are we going to cover this year? Especially when you start factoring things like parents' evenings or shows that your school does, you actually go, oh wow, actually you need to know in July that you're going to miss 7 meetings next year because of events. So put that into your mapping out. Don't wait for it to happen when you go, oh, crikey, we wanted to cover all these things this half term, and I've just realised there's only 3 staff meetings instead of 6. Like you've messed up if you get to that point. So being more deliberate and mapping things out in advance will definitely help your team feel like there's a deliberate journey that we're walking on together, and that meeting time matters and good things get done in those meetings because someone is thinking about them in a sort of a formal and deliberate way.
Does that come from the head teacher or perhaps an operational deputy head teacher? What would almost the setting of that course? Is that the leader who sets the course and then you bring everybody along with you as you're going on through the year?
Yeah, I think it comes from the head maybe to begin with to an extent. But if you sit down with your deputy and your assistant head and say, right, one of my non-negotiables here is that all the teams that we run, whether it's one big team or 3 different teams, they're all going to have the same approach. We map out things long term. There's transparency about what we're doing and when. People understand what we're learning as we go through the year. So you're going to do it with your team. I'm going to do it with this team, and then you keep talking about in SLT meetings. You get checking in that you're running teams in the same way. Because I think one of the big weaknesses we have in schools is there's sometimes a massive variability between the way teams are run across the school. And some people go, oh, I love working in this team. This is brilliant. We do tons of learning. We debrief stuff all the time. We're generally moving work forward. And a lot of people go, oh, my team leader just, we just open a pack of biscuits and we go through the stationery order, And so the head teacher has to set that tone to begin with, but then it's great to give other people responsibility to run their teams with a founding set of principles so that they can here are the non-negotiables for the way we run teams in this school, but here are the bits you can flex on as well. And then hopefully they'll grow great teams themselves, and then it's not all coming from one person.
Obviously, like you've taken your inspiration from different fields. How much value do you think there is in us spending our time sort of, if we're looking at the processes and the way we structure things, in looking at high performing teams and taking that into education? Is there as much transferability as we might imagine?
I think so massively. I remember when I first started writing The Power of Teams, a few people were kind of disagreeing with me about how much we could learn from other domains. That phrase, domain specific expertise, was flying around all over the place when I was first researching The Power of Teams. And obviously it's more work and it's more effort to read something from another sector, distill it down, and then try to apply it to our context. And it would be just to read a bit of research or a handbook about schools. But I've genuinely learned tons from it because we are in a bit of a bubble. Even the research that we look at and the sort of ways that like if you think about, okay, instructional coaching is massive in schools worldwide at the moment. But you can look at other contexts where they don't do anything like that. They have a completely different model of coaching. So I'm not saying either model is good or bad, but if we didn't look out, sometimes we'd miss out on things going on. So I remember doing all the research about team debriefs and looking at the way the military does it and looking at the way the hospitals do it and thinking, okay, they've definitely got some very specific factors that I can't consider here. But some of the frameworks they've created are, you can literally, click your fingers, change some of the wording, and you've got like a really ready to go framework that would work in any team, whether you were working at some sort of I don't know, the Lidl headquarters, or the US commandos, or a school in Sheffield or whatever. So I've learned tons from that approach, and I like it. It makes me feel like my brain's working when I go, oh, that's a really cool idea. I wonder how I could slightly adjust it to make it work in my context. Yeah, so I think there's loads to learn there. I feel like I'm opening up my mind, and I think I'm doing a lot of reading at the moment about cognitive biases and heuristics and the shortcuts our brains sort of make us do to save mental resources, which is great because we need our brains to do that. Otherwise, we labour over every single decision for too long. But actually, in doing that, our brain is sheltering us from a whole other way of looking at the world and objective views, and seeking out views that go against our own. So yeah, I've learned loads from other sectors. So I'm a big advocate for that. If you've got the time and the energy to invest in it, I think it's worth it. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, like we're both big NFL fans, and it's fascinating because the amount of recording they do behind the scenes, really unpicking how they behave with each other, and for better for worse sometimes. But you can see that if you look at the general principles of leadership and then you look at how they're applied, I think that certainly one thing you take away is that there are many ways to apply those principles based on your personality and stuff like that. There.
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely. Yeah. The NFL is a great one because I mean they're flooded with data, so they use data, but they in turn try to learn things from us because lots of sports teams now, whether it's rugby or NFL or basketball, they've realized that in order to communicate with their players about how to understand the data, they have to get them in more classroom settings, but they don't know that much about sort of explicit instruction or deliberate practice or anything like that. So they're finding that they are flooding their players with too much information, and then they need to actually have a more purposeful approach and probably read some Rosenshine or something. So it's kind of working both ways. We've got stuff to offer those professions as well.
Yeah, I mean, I listen to Nicky Butt and Paul Scholes, and they keep talking
Yeah.
about how there's too much information compared to in there whenever they obviously had that fantastically successful team in the late 90s, and they're always talking about how they get too much information. But someone actually mentioned to me the other day that the U.S. Marines are using the science of learning in their classrooms. Just funny you mentioned it. Can't remember who it was, or you can't even fact check it. But I maybe I'll come back to that in a private communication because it's
That is fascinating. I know that Doug Lemov, who's a mate of mine, big Palace fan, by the way, everybody, Crystal Palace fan. He does quite a lot of outside work consultancy with elite sports teams in around the world, and yeah, he's finding that they're like, oh, why I've given this player an iPad with 1,500 hours of footage on. Why haven't they understood the way I want them to run these routes in my NFL team? And it's like, well, have you ever heard of cognitive overload?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I always thought it'd be fascinating to see that tape that they're meant to be watching and what it actually looks like.
But how your
But
memory could possibly process all of it as well.
yeah, and then they give all those quarterbacks who don't make it like a really bad rap for not for not
Yeah.
assimilating all this knowledge. Oh, he just wasn't up with so it just shows you how fine the margins are in that sport, aren't they?
Absolutely, yeah.
Now, one of the things we know is that teachers are already carrying a huge amount, and when PPA ends up being spent building lessons from scratch at home, something has gone wrong. And that is exactly the kind of problem the story of maths is designed to solve. It's a fully sequenced primary maths curriculum built to reduce workload while improving the quality and coherence of what gets taught. Everything is designed to fit together so teachers are not left piecing things together for themselves. Now, we've also been continuing to develop our early years offer, and that now includes built-in professional development for teachers of early mathematics. So it's not just about giving people resources, it's about helping teachers understand the mathematics, the progression, and the pedagogical choices that sit behind it, especially in those crucial early stages. So, if you want a curriculum that's coherent, properly resourced, and designed to support both teacher development and student success, then have a look at the story of maths from Alta Education. What does belonging look like in a staff team, and how can leaders tell when it's actually there?
Good question. Big hot topic at the moment. Lots of blogs over the last sort of 6 months or so. I guess mainly talk about student belonging in schools. It's an interesting topic because it can become very fluffy and very sort of nebulous, I think, when you talk about belonging, and it means something different to everybody. And I just wrote a blog recently about how being an adoptee, I had a very specific take on belonging, and which would be different to other adoptees and other people who weren't adopted. So I think it doesn't mean everything the same thing to everybody. But I won't kind of repeat lots of things people have said about belonging, about mutual trust and respect and all that kind of stuff. But I've led a lot of teams and I've worked in a lot of teams. I genuinely feel like people that what massively affects their belonging is if their leader and the work that the team are doing is kind of competent and you can create really lovely warm environments and you can have really great chats in a team meeting. But if you come back to the next team meeting and things haven't been followed up from before, you're like, oh, that's funny. I felt like we had a really great discussion to which I contributed a lot and I felt like my contributions were valued, but the team leader hasn't actually done any of the things that affects your feeling of belonging, because you think, oh, actually, like, is this really my tribe if people aren't really working? I thought this was really important to us, but maybe it's not to you. So I think kind of competence and kind of follow-up angle is massive for belonging. And I think it's not as trendy or fashionable to kind of say that or write about that. But and the same for student belonging. Like for me, if you want to create great belonging in schools, you have amazing culture of behavior, disruption-free lessons, because then kids walk through the gate every day going, this is going to be quite a predictable day for me. And that's what makes me feel good about my environment, is when I know what's going to roughly happen in my day. Can't control everything, obviously. And it's the same thing for staff. When you go into a team meeting every week and it's always full of sharing and discussion and work that moves the group forward, you walk to that meeting thinking, yeah, this is going to be a good meeting. I feel like I'm part of this group and we get stuff done. But when you walk to that meeting thinking, oh man, this is a 1 hour monologue, or the team leader will do what they always do, ask us for opinion on something and two people take over, that's when you feel low levels of belonging. And there's this kind of research that's been talked about in the last few years about how our brains are basically, they're called predictive processors. They're just prediction machines making predictions all the time based on past experiences. So for me, to belong, you need to have a really good foundation of consistency of like, what does that usually look like for me? And do I usually feel like I'm part of this thing? So that's definitely a big part of it, I think. And then connecting with that is all the research on psychological safety, which also gets really misappropriated by kind of AI bloggers and all that kind of stuff, because again, psychological safety has a bit of an annoying name because it sounds like everyone's just like high-fiving and like, sort of being slightly hippie about their approach. But psychological safety, what it really means is that the team feels like there's a culture where it can openly share stuff, make errors and mistakes without being kind of chastised for it, and give each other really open feedback to move the work of the team forward, to be ambitious and challenge one another to do the best possible work and to use your expertise to further each other and yourselves. So if you were going to walk into to go back to your original question, which I've slightly skirted, what does it look like in a team? You'd walk in and you'd see the free and open exchange of ideas, a little bit of healthy debate and discussion where not everyone agrees all the time, and that doesn't result in a major shutdown or awkward moment, because it's the norm to discuss and to disagree. And you go, you know what? Conflict sometimes makes us better when it's constructive and focused on a task. So, and we know that that's going to help our work move forward. And we all feel like we're part of that. And we need each one of us to contribute to that because we believe in each other. For me, that's belonging, when you're part of a group that really moves each other's work forward, not just we're warm and we're smiley and we've got a cake rota and that sort of stuff.
For me, the best thing about that is that it's completely actionable. There's no, what is, you're not trying to look for a feeling or a sensation or a vibe. You can be competent, and I think like the sort of the scenario that frustrates me the most in leadership context is the Vichy government setup, where all the decisions have already been made in advance. But let's go through a 2.5 hour meeting as we pretend that it was our decision, rather than some higher up, And so I'm imagining, me walking into those meetings where I feel like I'm going to be listened to and I can contribute. It's a really powerful feeling. I totally get you.
I think the same is true with multi-academy trust as well. If you're running a network group or you're leading the head teachers in a multi-academy trust, as you just said, if you rock up to that meeting, you're like, well, I know they've already decided everything. They're just going to justify it for the next hour and a half. You don't feel like you're part of something there, really. You just feel like, okay, I'll just do your bidding. I'll sell it to my staff because I'm a good person and I'm on board, but I don't really feel like I belong to that mission because you've already pre-decided it.
And I'll have my hour and a half back, please, if that's okay.
Yeah.
If that's going to be the
Can,
case.
can someone do my marking that I just lost time to do? Yeah.
If you've ever finished an episode of Thinking Deeply about Primary Education and wanted to go further, to read more, think more, and connect ideas, hey, what you reading for is exactly where you should start. Each week, we curate the best thinking from across education, books that challenge assumptions, research that informs practice, and podcasts that broaden perspectives. From curriculum and pedagogy to sound leadership and international insights, it's your weekly companion for meaningful professional growth. And because we know teachers are time poor but enthusiasm rich, it's concise, evidence informed, and genuinely useful. Subscribe for free at thinkingdeeply.info. And so, what are you talking? 7 months now, but at the time of recording, in primary headship. Is there anything that it's taught you or revealed to you about the relationship between systems, culture, and improvement in general?
Oh, that's a really good question. Yeah. I guess one thing I've learned is that you can't enjoy the culture that you profess to value and desire if people are struggling with high workload or what they feel is arbitrary tasks within their workload. Because you can create like a nice, smiley, open atmosphere. Like I'm pretty confident that I'm quite good at walking around a school, being warm and open, listening to people, setting the kind of temperature. You make the weather kind of thing. I'm pretty sure I'm okay at that kind of stuff. Or I put a lot of effort into doing that, even though it's quite tiring and training to do that. But none of that really counts for very much if your teachers smile at you and feel like you're a nice person, and then they go back and they're like, oh, he makes me put my data into 15 different spreadsheets, and I have to itemize every spelling mark in this for every single member of my class, and end up putting in 300 bits of data, or he makes me tick and flick with my books every single day so that every piece of work is seen and marked by a teacher, yada, yada, yada. So I guess what I've learned is and I was a bit blind to all the processes and systems that are maybe historical in the primary sector. So like bookmarking and approach to data in my school was like revelatory to me, because I feel like in the secondary sector, and maybe this is true of a lot of primaries as well, but we've kind of canned bookmarking and we've canned unnecessary data drops and that sort of stuff. But I've talking to primary leaders, that still seems to be a cultural thing that goes on in a few places at least. So I was thinking, okay, well, I've got to truly set the weather and make the weather at my school, I've got to start peeling back unnecessary work tasks that the teachers are doing. And the marking policy, we changed it, we ripped it all up and called it the feedback policy, and the word marking's kind of barely in there. And we amalgamated the data into one place, and it's only a termly data drop instead of every 6 weeks across 15 spreadsheets. And so I think you can't enjoy the sort of rich, flourishing culture while people are doing arbitrary work that doesn't. The phrase that I use is like, is the juice worth the squeeze? So the hour that took you to do that, did that have an impact on your teaching or the children's learning? And if it didn't, then we've got to find a way to get rid of that. So yeah, it's a really good question, Kieran. So I don't think you can enjoy a flourishing culture that's purposeful if people feel like they're doing work in the background that doesn't contribute to that mission. So I've definitely learned a lot about how we kind of manage that. And right, if we're going to do this initiative, we're going to launch, I don't know, we've launched these everyone makes fun of my trust because instead of teaching and learning, we call it learning and teaching. So we've just launched some learning and teaching principles for our school, which are great. I really believe in them. We're going through lots of evidence-informed approaches and videos to see to codify how that will look in our school. But I was aware before we launched that we had to take more things away. Otherwise, this is going to become another additional initiative that no one can fit in. So we have to look at like, what can we do differently to give people the energy and the headspace to actually implement that properly in their classroom. So it's things like that. So that's really, really helped that approach of like, what can we take away? What can we reduce in order to lay something in you and create that culture where everyone feels like they're part of something that's manageable and also hopefully inspiring and warm as well.
That's amazing. So you've just gone in and you've just scythed all that stuff, all the sort of stuff that we do that's not necessarily driven by evidence, but driven by bureaucracy from a bygone
I
age.
think,
And
I mean,
was
I
it a
can't
big
profess to
cheer?
have done this all on my own. It's like it's a team effort, and I've learned everyone around me. I mean, I've been asking so many questions all year about why do we do this, why do we do this. But I think it's almost good coming from a secondary background into the primary and vice versa, because I've been able to go, well, why would you do that? And everyone's kind of will either tell me why or go, yeah, we're not really sure. It's kind of a thing that we've always done. Um, so I think it's my ignorance has actually driven some things that we've done because people have been able to kind of educate me and not me them, but I've been able to sort of poke holes in things just through my sheer ignorance rather than so some of it I think we've just happened on by accident and yeah, so I think it's going okay so far. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and that's the thing. I think quite often there could be a fear of we've always done this. What happens if we don't do this? And particularly as accountability rises again within the sector, um, and if head teachers see, oh look, we're not using written feedback in all of our lessons, and the school hasn't collapsed and stuff, and do you have plans to write blogs about this and stuff? Because I think that's the message that head teachers need to, or school leaders need to hear, is that the world doesn't end if you drop some of these sort of less effective but pretty ingrained. Because you say, oh, these are still common in a few places. I would hazard they're common in most places, and it's only the within the little sort of evidence informed bubble, because you know that it's smaller within primary than it even within secondary.
Mm.
I think that message needs to get out there. So, do you have any plans to share your experiences of like these practicalities? Because I think they're really important.
Yeah, I still feel like a total fraud sitting in the primary chair, So actually, I haven't even thought about writing a blog about some lessons learned from primary because I still just feel like who am I to maybe I will from more of a general leadership perspective. But yeah, the primary, I still think I'm still a novice and an amateur, so I'd feel really difficult to to sort of get on my high horse about that.
I mean, but that's the kind of imposter syndrome that most primary teachers and leaders feel
Mm.
anyway. I think so. I mean, you could always like Shan Doherty. I bet you she would co-author with you, and she could almost fact check and say, yeah, I agree with that, because she's obviously living the deputy head dream in Tunbridge Wells at the moment. So I bet you she's got quite a
Mm-hmm.
bit of a similar story to share. But obviously,
Yeah.
I'm not going to force you to write these blogs.
No, I'd definitely be interested in doing it. And it is really interesting. When it comes to things like the accountability measures you mentioned, I think one of the things is I'm hoping that this still carries on in current inspections, but it's like the people who are measuring whatever you're doing, your kind of provision. My line's always been, well, if we do what our policy says, and we've got a clear rationale for why we do it, we can prove that it works, and we're all doing it in a similar way, then you can't really pick a hole in that. So this is, goes back to when we were talking about relaunching our marking policy as a school. Was that okay? Well, here, we've provided a clear evidence base on our policy. We know that it's manageable. It means that what we're saying in the policy, actually, all the kids are getting, and we can see it evidently from when we go around lessons and observe lessons. And then fine. Like we don't need to do things the old way because we're proving that we're consistent in what we do now and it's in our policy and we're sticking to our policy. So I think sometimes just getting over that fear of like, what will the inspectors say?
Yeah, which is I think reasonable. But it's being a little bit braver, isn't it, and pushing forward. I mean, what was the staff reaction to those almost this subtractive process that you did they realize that was happening around them, or did they have they sort of almost realized the benefits a couple of months later when they thought actually things are a bit better now, or we've got more time for X, Y, and Z? I mean, I don't want to guess, but what's their reaction been?
I'm really lucky. I've got a very, very positive, open staff team. So I think they would back me and go for it, even if they thought it was a load of rubbish, just to see it's just to see how it pans out because they're really supportive like that. But I think whenever you say to people, I think you do too much of that, and I don't think it gives us any benefits. And I think they're usually obviously pretty happy to. I find a lot of times people say, "Oh, I've been thinking that for years, and I haven't like battled against it." So when you say we're going to reduce marking of books and we're going to prioritize live marking and the way we do kind of checking for understanding in lesson and the way we use visualizers, they're like, oh, okay, great. It's like we're going to stop this, but we're going to do this to make sure we still understand how much the kids are learning. So I found that all the staff really, really positive about that sort of thing. and we're going to quite dramatically change our end of year reports because my school still does the very lengthy, lovely as a parent. I'm actually a parent at the school that I head at. Lovely, long, very, very long end of year reports. No, they've done that for years, and I've never known the under the bonnet approach to that, which is that they start collecting evidence throughout the year, filing it away, ready to do this mammoth writing task in May and June. And I kind of came in and I was like, why do we do that? Like, why don't we do two really great parents' evenings a year, so the parents already feel like they've really caught up to date with progress and attitude and all that kind of stuff. We have so many touch points with the parents in person throughout the year. They really feel like they know us and we know them and we know their kids. Why are we writing like a 3 to 4 page? So I've just said we're going to cut it all right down to a really short, concise. Everyone's like, "Oh my gosh, this is so brilliant." And I'm thinking, but why didn't we just do that years ago? Like, it's just funny how things endure, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. I remember there was like the first deadline, and there was the second deadline, and so you would be sculpting these manuscripts. Probably put more effort in that than I did the books I've written. But like you say, as a parent, it's really nice because, like, I mean, the thing that really always stands out to me is tapestry. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but it's like basically photographs and videos of your children when they're in reception, and they
Mm,
get sent to you. But the teachers are uploading at 11 o'clock at night, and all of these are lovely. But I do not want you working this late
mm, mm.
for something I'm going to look at and go, that's nice.
That is the part of leadership where I go, I'll take any flack from the parents. I'll justify it to any parents who say this isn't as good as it used to be. You don't need to worry about that bit. You just crack on. The time you save from this, put into your own development or your planning of your great curriculum or whatever. And I'll take the heat for that decision. So that's when you can stand up as an individual, as a leader, and kind of shield your team from all the extraneous stuff that's floating around.
It's the umbrella, isn't it? Like, can't remember whose analogy that is, but I always remember like the really strong head teachers I've worked with have kept us shielded from so much stuff. It's almost the one that the head teacher perhaps doesn't get credit for sometimes, especially if they do it really well. You don't notice
Mm.
that they've done it. Like a Darn Fletcher. You didn't realize he was doing all the stuff he was doing until he stopped doing it, and then you had 13 years of misery.
Great, great Darren Fletcher reference there.
If a leader wanted to strengthen one team habit next term, because I think we're all looking to term 5 really, maybe term 6 realistically, because obviously we've got SATs and stuff coming up. Where should they start and why?
Good question. So I talked earlier on about the research behind team debriefs. That was actually when I was doing the research for this book for the Power of Teams. That's probably where I got most caught up in terms of like, wow, I'd never really heard of this before. Like, we don't really use the word debrief in, but I just kept finding massive like meta-analyses after meta-analyses showing that when teams regularly debrief, there's one huge study that shows that their effectiveness improves by 20 to 25%. And they have to kind of follow certain conditions. So what this research found was that, and I really resonated with me with a secondary school leader because we have this sort of myth of like gain time, when year 11 and year 13 kind of leave. Now, when I first started teaching, they'd be off by about sort of early to mid June because the exam window was quite short. And now they go on to about end of June now, so gain time is even more of a myth now than it used to be. But essentially, if you have a year 11 and year 13 class on your timetable, you're like, well, hey, I've got like X number of hours a week now where I'm not teaching. So you cram in all of your end of year evaluation, you're making stuff for next year. And a lot of schools typically did their sort of big planning days and all that sort of stuff in June and July, and then frantically tried to implement as much of it as they can for September. But actually, the research behind debriefs is fascinating because it says, no. You have to take even a big thing and then chunk it up and spread the debriefing out of that thing into focused steps over time. So, for example, let's say you and I have just, I don't know, we're like on SLT at a primary school, and we've just launched a big reading initiative for the school. We've just bought into one. We've spent a load of cash. It's going to take a lot of time for teachers to roll this out effectively and consistently to see the outcomes that we want, which is better reading fluency for all of our kids. But the temptation would be to, like, I don't know, kick off and then a couple of months in, do a staff meeting where we go, right, how's it going? how's the reading initiative going, everybody? And then you start getting this like scattergun approach of, oh well, the student engagement is not good enough, or the website keeps crashing, or oh, I think the texts are too difficult actually. And then someone else goes, oh, I think they're too easy. And actually, what you've got there is this like not very productive, holistic debrief. So what the research suggests is that you take the project, you do a little pre-mortem in advance and go, okay, like what are the things or the aspects or the functions of this reading initiative that are going to cause us a bit of challenge, or that we're going to have to be really careful with. And then you use your mapped out team meeting agenda that you've made for the year, and you go, right, on October the 6th, we're going to look at the student participation with the reading fluency and how much they're doing at school and at home, because we can track all that with data, and we're just going to talk about that. On November the 5th, we're going to look at the text challenges, and we're going to bring a couple of the texts along. We're going to think, is this the right level of challenge? So we're going to chunk up and just do it little and often, like teacher tap, little and often. And obviously, there are some other conditions of debriefing as well, like everyone has a voice, you share it in advance so people can start thinking about it. You know, it's a psychologically safe, good debrief. But what they found was that when you chunk up things like that, a really healthy functional debrief that moves the work along doesn't need to be longer than 18 minutes. 18 minutes was the average. So you can have a really great team meeting that covers other things, other operational aspects of what you're doing, a bit of CPD, and still have a 20-minute debrief that addresses one area of your work and moves that along in a manageable, chunked way. And I think that's what I found really interesting. And I often find that school teams do not function like that at all. They just save up loads of feedback. They have one big blitz in an hour, and then there's too much. All the horses bolted, and some of the things they talked about are now historical issues. So that's been the thing that I think I would start literally mapping out the things we want to improve on, probably linked to our development plan, so we're not covering too many random things all at once, or the things we've just started doing. How are we going to debrief on aspects of that throughout the whole year? And let's map it out now. And the staff love it because they're like, oh, we keep ticking off different areas of this project and making it a little bit better every time. And that's, I talked earlier on about belonging and feeling like your work's not moving forward. That's because sometimes we try and evaluate too much at once, and it's impossible to make everyone happy because you can't split yourself between all those things. Whereas the focused chunk debrief, everyone's like, oh wow, yeah, we totally nailed how we're going to sort out student participation. I can't wait till the next one when we look at yada yada yada, because I know that we'll move that bit forward as well. And there's tons of multi-sector research to back up that approach to debriefing. So it's really stimulating and fun, actually, but also it makes you better at what you're doing. So that's what I'd be like, right, go and do that, leaders, straight away.
I mean, it's solid gold. And every time, like, when I hear you mention this, I always shudder with the thought of the action plans I've looked at and thought, I should have done something about this 6 months ago. And everything you're saying, I mean, it's amazing how much of it just comes down to being organized and following through on what you said you're going to do, and if you do that, then schools, it feels like, are going to be more effective, but also better places to be.
I mean, it sounds really silly, but I often go through my Outlook calendar, and I'm a big email pinner, but on my Outlook calendar, I often go, right, my teaching and learning meeting is then. So 3 weeks before that, I'll just put a little calendar item at 8 a.m. and say, you need to collect the various bits of evidence for that meeting and start planning it and start talking to people about what you're going to expect from them in that meeting now. So then if you do have a really busy week and you naturally forget stuff, or you accidentally bin your bit of paper to-do list, you've got that reminder, okay, I'm planning this. So my calendar looks a bit crazy because it's full of little reminders to myself, but that's how you keep on top of it. Or the other one I do quite often is a week after a meeting, I'll do a little calendar item to myself at like 3 p.m. saying, have you followed up on the action points from the meeting yet? So what everyone contributed has been addressed in some way. Again, it's not rocket science. It just helps nudge me because loads of things might have come up that might have made me forget if I hadn't done that.
I mean, that's expert level use of the digital calendar. But it's definitely a tool that we're not even making the most of, isn't it? I have a Friday standing agenda item that I will action any unaddressed starred emails. So like yourself, like pinned, so it's starred on Google, but pinned on when I'm using Outlook, and it makes a massive difference because then sometimes you don't have to go, oh, I should have responded a long time ago to this person, that kind of thing.
You know, when you've worked with really busy people before, or head teachers who are like amazing, and you go and people go, "Oh, they're brilliant," but I wish they'd actually respond to emails. I wish they'd actually read their emails. And I'm like, I never wanted, and there's no criticism of people that aren't great with emails, but I never wanted to be that. I'm like, well, however busy I am, I can never be the person that people say, "Oh yeah, but they're a nightmare with their emails, or they're a nightmare with getting back to me about stuff." I'm like, whatever I've got going on in my day, I've got to make sure that is an important part of my day because it really, really matters to people. And people might have a joke about it, go, ha ha ha, yeah, but look at their emails. I was like, that can't be me. I've got to find a system to make sure that I actually follow through on what I say I will do. And my brain's not always capable of it on its own. So, I've got electronic partners to help with that. With that.
Get your list to zero. Sometimes you see thousands of emails in people's inboxes and wonder how they mentally cope with that. And I certainly couldn't. So I mean, hopefully what we've done is build on some of the conversations you've had with people in the past. And I think if anyone's interested, if anyone hasn't read the Power Teams, they definitely need to. Your podcast version is available anywhere people want to pick it up. Is that right, Sam?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's free on like Apple and Spotify, and yeah, just go and check it out. And I think it was good because I read out the book on the podcast. I think about 2 years after I wrote it, so there's some good reflections on things that I've maybe picked up since then, and how I've learned as well. Yeah.
Nice. So, I mean, it's been recommended a number of times by guests on the podcast. So, I reckon most listeners will probably have. But if not, there's the perfect read along opportunity where you could just sit and read. And I always really like it when the author reads an audiobook because I listen to quite a lot of audiobooks. Like when I'm like yourself when you're traveling and so that read along functionality. There's a lot to learn. And everyone loves a Lego metaphor. So an excuse to bust out the theme tune. I think. Cool. So all said to say thank you very much for joining me. It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you, Sam.
Thanks, Kieran. I've had a blast, and I hope it's been useful to your listeners as well.
No doubt. And everyone at home, until next time, thanks for listening.